He went on his last patrol before leaving the service and found a submarine sunk in the middle of the swamps. But when the hatch was opened, even the most experienced officers couldn't say a word. Look what was hidden inside. Subscribe and write in the comments which city you're from. The morning began gray and heavy, the kind of Florida morning when the sky feels like a ceiling about to collapse. Sergeant Tom Miller sat on the edge of his narrow bed inside the rusted trailer he called home. The air smelled of mildew and coffee gone cold hours ago. On the small table beside him lay a single white envelope with the seal of the Monroe County Sheriff's Department. He didn't need to open it again to remember the words. Final notice. Termination effective at the end of the month. He had read them enough times already, as if hoping that the meaning might change with repetition. He rubbed his temples, feeling the familiar throb of a headache that came not from lack of sleep, but from the kind of exhaustion that starts somewhere deep inside the soul. 7 years of service, 20 more in the Marines before that, and still, here he was, reduced to a name on a list, one more man the department could do without. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same department that once praised his instincts now wanted him gone, because those instincts had led him too far off the book. He turned his eyes toward the photograph pinned to the fridge. 2 men stood in front of a patrol boat, both smiling under the glaring sun. Tom and his partner, Dan Harper. It had been taken just 3 weeks before everything went wrong. Dan had been younger, sharper, the kind of cop who still believed in justice untainted by compromise. That belief had died the night he did. Tom had replayed that night in his mind more times than he could count. The order to move in too soon, the sudden gunfire, the radio crackling with static. When the smoke cleared, Harper was gone, and all that was left for Tom was silence and blame. He took a deep breath and glanced at the clock. He still had one last patrol to finish before the department closed his file for good. A routine sweep, the dispatcher had said. Take the route through the Everglades, check for illegal traps or campfires, and report in by noon. That was all. Nothing heroic, nothing meaningful. Just another loop around the swamp before the curtain fell. Outside, the air clung to his skin like damp cloth. The swamp stretched endlessly ahead, a mirror of gray water and green shadows. The Everglades were both beautiful and cruel, a place that hid what it didn't want to be found. The air buzzed with insects, and the faint hum of frogs rose like a chorus from the reeds. He started the engine of his patrol boat, the hum of the motor drowning out his thoughts for a while. He moved through the channels, the sunlight breaking in faint streaks through the cypress branches. Every corner of the swamp seemed to breathe, as though something ancient lived beneath the surface. Miller had always believed that this land was honest, in a way people weren't. It kept its secrets, but it never lied about what it was. People lied all the time. He steered toward the southern edge of the patrol route, where the water grew darker, almost black. His radio hissed every few minutes, then fell silent again. Reception was poor here. It always had been. He had worked these routes for years, and yet, on that morning, something felt different. The silence wasn't natural. It was expectant. He slowed down when a flash of metal caught his eye beneath the surface. At first, he thought it was just a piece of debris, an old oil drum, or maybe part of a boat engine lost years ago. But the shape didn't fit. It looked too smooth, too deliberate. He leaned closer over the railing. A curved line of steel, dulled by rust, peeked out from the mud and weeds. Tom frowned. There were rumors of smugglers using makeshift boats, but this looked like something else entirely. He circled the spot, switched off the motor, and let the current carry him closer. The shape came into focus, a rounded hole, partially buried, its surface mottled with algae and silt. It wasn't a boat at all. It was something smaller, tighter, almost claustrophobic. It reminded him of a submarine. A chill crept through him as he stared at it. What kind of person would build a submarine in the middle of the Everglades? He grabbed his radio and pressed the call button. "Dispatch, this is Unit 17. I've got a submerged metallic object here. Coordinates transmitting now. Could be wreckage, but I'm not sure. Requesting backup." The response came through a haze of static. "Copy that, Unit 17. Stay put. Team en route." He sat back and waited, the swamp surrounding him in near silence, except for the soft slap of water against the hull. He tried to shake off the unease building in his chest. It was probably nothing, a drug runner's half-baked invention, or maybe an old experiment dumped decades ago. Still, his gut told him otherwise. The same gut that once saved him and Harper from an ambush. The same gut that failed him when Harper died. Within the hour, the sound of an approaching boat broke the stillness. 2 officers from the Marine unit arrived with a small crane and diving gear. They greeted him with polite professionalism, the kind they reserved for someone already half out the door. Together, they attached hooks and cables to the rusted structure. When the crane began to lift, the swamp groaned as if reluctant to let go. As the object rose, water poured from its seams in brown streams, releasing the smell of decay and iron. The hull was roughly welded together, the joints uneven, smeared with resin. Someone had built it in a hurry, or in secrecy. A homemade sub, no doubt about it. The sight of it struck Miller with something close to fascination. It was the kind of thing that didn't belong in the world above water. "Looks like it's been down here for years," one of the divers muttered. "Maybe decades." Miller didn't answer. He crouched by the side of the craft, running his fingers over the pitted metal. There were marks on the surface scratches, dents, one large crater on the right side, as if something had exploded inside. His flashlight swept over faint letters etched into the metal, half erased by rust. He jotted them down in his notebook without knowing why. They placed the sub on a barge and began draining the remaining water. The hatch on top was sealed shut. Not locked. Sealed. Someone had welded it from the inside. The realization sent a shiver down his spine. Why would anyone trap themselves in there? The crane operator turned to him. "Want to wait for the forensics team before we open it?" Tom hesitated, looking at the hatch, the faint smell of salt and decay seeping from its seams. "We'll wait," he said quietly, though every instinct told him that whatever was inside had been waiting much longer than they had. He leaned on the railing, watching the water ripple where the submarine had lain buried. The swamp seemed to breathe again, relieved or resentful, he couldn't tell. In the fading afternoon light, the Everglades stretched endlessly around him, flat, vast, indifferent. Somewhere out there, the truth was buried just as deep as the wreck they had hauled out. As the sun sank behind the mangroves, Tom Miller felt something shift inside him. For the first time in years, he wasn't just a man waiting for his career to end. He was part of a story. Again, one that the swamp itself had chosen to tell. He didn't know yet that, by the time it finished, it would take back everything it gave him, and more. He looked once more at the silent, rusted hull. Whatever lay inside had been hidden for a reason. And though he didn't know it yet, opening that hatch would drag his past back from the depths, forcing him to confront the ghosts he had spent years trying to drown. He stayed until darkness swallowed the marshes, listening to the hum of insects rise around him. The swamp no longer felt quiet. It felt alive, whispering beneath its breath, as though warning him to leave while he still could. But Tom Miller didn't leave. He stood by the relic until the last of the daylight vanished, the stagnant water reflecting only the faint glow of his boat's searchlight and the silhouette of a man who had just pulled the first thread of a story, too heavy for one lifetime to carry. The radio crackled once before falling silent again. The team would return at dawn to cut the hatch open. Tom sat back in the boat, lighting a cigarette with trembling hands. The flame flickered against his face, revealing eyes that had seen too much and believed too little. Somewhere in the swamp, a bird screamed a sound so sharp and human it made his pulse quicken. He told himself it was only the wind, but deep down, he knew it wasn't. The Everglades were never just a swamp. They were a graveyard, and tonight, something inside that grave had begun to stir. By morning, the swamp had turned into a pale ocean of mist. The fog clung to the mangroves, and the horizon looked like a blank sheet of paper, waiting to be stained by the day's revelations. Tom Miller arrived early at the dock, long before the other officers, driven by a restless urgency he couldn't quite name. The barge was there, its metal deck slick with dew, the strange submarine resting on it like a dead animal dragged from its lair. It looked smaller in daylight, less like a vessel, and more like a coffin forged from rust. He felt as though it was watching him, daring him to open it. When the others arrived, 2 technicians, a forensics officer, and Captain Torres Miller already had gloves on, a pry bar in hand, and a faint tremor running through his shoulders. Torres frowned, keeping his distance. "You're not even on this case anymore," he said, though not unkindly. Miller ignored the comment, his eyes fixed on the hatch. "You'll want to see this through, right?" he murmured, half to himself. "I pulled it out of the water. I'll see what's inside." Torres sighed and waved the technicians closer. "Fine. But you're a guest here, not in charge. Understood?" The first attempt to cut the welded hatch failed. The steel was thicker than expected, layered with marine residue that dulled the tools almost instantly. Sparks flew, smoke rose, and the smell of burning saltwater filled the air. When the seal finally gave way, a dull hiss escaped, like a long-held breath released after years underwater. Everyone fell silent. For a moment, no one moved. Miller's flashlight beam cut through the darkness inside the chamber. What it revealed froze him in place. 2 figures sat slumped opposite each other. Their flesh had decayed into gray, leathery shapes, but the outlines of their uniforms remained. One still had a headset around his neck, the wire looping across his lap like a dead snake. Between them, stacked neatly along the floor, were dozens of plastic-wrapped bricks, each marked with a black symbol that every officer recognized immediately. Cocaine, a lot of it. The forensic team exchanged glances. Torres muttered, "Drug runners, probably cartel. Poor bastards never made it." But Miller wasn't listening. His eyes had caught something else, something small, metallic, glinting faintly in the flashlight beam. It dangled from one of the corpse's necks, resting against the fabric of a decomposed shirt. A military dog tag. He stepped forward before anyone could stop him, reaching into the gloom. The tag was cold, even through the gloves, etched with a name he knew too well. Harper Daniel L. His breath hitched. For a few seconds, the world seemed to narrow, until there was only that single piece of metal in his palm. He heard Torres's voice distantly, asking if he was okay. He didn't answer. The name on the tag shimmered in the light like a ghost refusing to fade. They bagged the remains and cataloged the cargo, but Miller stayed on the edge of the barge, staring out at the swamp. The air felt heavier now, almost personal, as if the land itself were accusing him. Harper's tag clinked softly in the evidence tray, and with every sound, Miller's chest tightened. His partner had been declared dead years ago. His body supposedly lost in a raid gone wrong near the Gulf. There had been no remains to bury, no closure. Yet here he was, rotting in a makeshift submarine, hundreds of miles from where he was supposed to have died. That night, Miller sat in his truck outside the department, the tag hanging from the rearview mirror. He replayed the details of that day long ago. The explosion, the panic, the gunfire. Something about the timeline had never added up, but no one wanted to listen back then. The department had closed the file within a week. Operational miscommunication, the report said. Collateral damage. He remembered shouting in the captain's office until his throat burned. After that, he stopped shouting altogether. He couldn't sleep. The faces of the two men in the submarine haunted him, their hands still close to the controls, the wires, the containers. There was a purpose in the way they had died, as if they had been following orders to the very end. He opened his laptop and searched through old records, finding nothing about sunken vessels or lost operations in the Everglades. Then he typed a single word into the archive system: Harper. Dozens of files appeared, but most were locked. One, however, caught his attention. It was a debrief summary from 2 years ago, the same month Harper disappeared. Attached was a photo, blurry, cropped, taken from a drone feed. In the corner of the image, barely visible, was a shape in the water. Rounded, metallic, familiar. He felt his pulse quicken. The same shape, the same size. Harper had been there. He hadn't died in a firefight. He had gone into that swamp, and someone had made sure he didn't come back. Miller showed up at the department the next morning, demanding access to the archives. Captain Torres refused immediately. "The case is closed. You're off duty, Tom. Don't make this harder." But Miller's voice rose, steady and cold. "Then who's going to explain why my partner's dog tag was found in a cartel sub?" Torres looked at him for a long time, then lowered his voice. "Because sometimes the dead don't stay where we put them. Let it go." But letting go had never been Miller's talent. He called Lucas, an old technician who owed him a favor. They met that evening in a rundown bar near the marina. Lucas was balding, his hands stained with grease from years of fixing boats for the department. "You're playing with fire, Tommy," he said, sliding a manila folder across the table. "You didn't get this from me." Inside were copies of manifests, shipment logs, and a coded map with coordinates marked in red. Miller spread the papers out under the dim bar light. "What's Delta Marsh?" he asked. Lucas hesitated. It was a private contract, Program X Military Logistics, supposedly moving equipment for the Coast Guard. But word was, they were running something else on the side. Drugs, weapons, maybe even people. When one of their runs went wrong, they buried it. Literally. The words sank into him like lead. And Harper? Lucas swallowed his drink. If he was part of that op, he probably found out too much. Miller drove back to his trailer with the folder beside him. He couldn't stop looking at the map, the lines converging on a single set of coordinates deep inside the Everglades. He spread it on the table, tracing the path with his finger. The point where he'd found the submarine was only one of several marked locations. Something told him there was more buried beneath that water. That night, he dreamed of Harper. They were back in the patrol boat, the same one from the photo on his fridge. The sky was orange, the water still. Harper turned to him and said, "You didn't listen, Tommy. I told you the swamp keeps what it loves." Then his face dissolved, and the sound of gurgling water filled the air until Miller woke up drenched in sweat. He sat in the dark, clutching the tag. It was cold again, almost biting against his skin. He played the old recordings from the submarine's data drive that the forensic team had given him. Most of it was static, muffled voices, meaningless clicks. But then a phrase emerged, buried under the noise. Delta Marsh confirmed. The voice was deep, distorted, but it didn't belong to a stranger. It belonged to Harper. Miller's breath caught. He replayed it again and again. The same inflection, the same clipped rhythm. Harper had been inside that sub, reporting to someone, maybe trying to send a final message. The timestamp matched the night of his supposed death. That couldn't be coincidence. He started piecing the puzzle together on his wall, pinning photos, reports, and maps. Red string connected the places and names. It looked insane, but for the first time in years, Miller felt alive. The swamp hadn't just given him a corpse. It had given him a truth too heavy for anyone else to hold. Days turned into a blur of coffee and sleepless nights. He stopped showing up for meetings, ignoring Torres's calls. His small trailer became a war room of memories and evidence. The deeper he dug, the clearer it became. Harper had discovered something during that last mission, something that tied the department itself to the cartel's operation. The submarine wasn't a fluke. It was a failed delivery. And someone inside law enforcement had made sure it stayed hidden forever. He played the recording one last time before heading out again. The static faded, replaced by the same chilling whisper. Delta Marsh confirmed. The phrase echoed in his mind as he drove back toward the swamp. The mist was thicker that evening, swallowing the world in white. The Everglades waited like a patient animal. He could feel the weight of the water pressing down on everything that lived beneath it. Standing at the edge of the dock, he realized he was no longer afraid of what he might find. What terrified him was the thought that he might find nothing at all, that Harper's death would sink back into silence once again. He tossed the cigarette into the dark water, watching the ember fade. The swamp rippled, as if answering. Miller turned and walked toward his boat. The truth was no longer buried. It was calling to him from below the surface, whispering in Harper's voice. And he was ready to listen, even if it drowned him too. The morning came with a grayness that felt heavier than rain. The Everglades lay under a shroud of mist, the kind that blurred the line between water and sky until everything looked drowned. Tom Miller sat inside his boat with the engine off, the air thick with humidity and silence. He hadn't slept in 2 days. The files from Lucas lay on the passenger seat, covered with coffee stains and ash. Each time he looked at the red marks on the map, the sense of inevitability grew stronger. He knew where he had to go, even if he didn't know what waited for him there. The department had tried to shut him down. The official statement had gone out the night before. All evidence connected to the Everglades submarine case is classified and sealed under federal review. But Miller had already seen too much. He knew what those words meant. It wasn't about protecting an investigation. It was about burying it deeper, the same way they had buried Harper. He started the engine, its growl breaking through the morning stillness. The swamp opened before him like a living maze, narrow channels weaving through walls of mangroves. The further he went, the less the modern world seemed to exist. His GPS flickered, then died. Only the coordinates from Lucas's hand-drawn map remained. He followed them by instinct, one eye on the horizon, the other on the trembling compass needle. After an hour, the path widened into a still, open basin. The air smelled faintly of oil and metal. Then he saw it, a half-collapsed wooden structure standing on stilts above the water. It might have been a fishing hut once, but now it looked like something built for hiding, not living. The tin roof sagged inward, and an old flag fluttered limply from a pole near the dock. Miller slowed the boat and let it drift closer. He stepped onto the warped boards, each one groaning under his weight. Inside, the smell of damp paper and gasoline hit him immediately. Sunlight filtered through the broken windows, landing on a table cluttered with maps, photographs, and empty ammo boxes. The place had been abandoned in a hurry. Still, someone had been here recently enough to leave footprints in the dust. On the far wall hung a photo that made his breath stop. Harper again, this time in uniform, standing beside another man. Captain Torres. The image was dated 6 months before Harper's death. The back of the photo carried 2 words written in marker. Delta Marsh. He turned slowly, the sound of water shifting outside making his pulse quicken. Through the window, he saw the shimmer of another boat approaching. 2 men. One of them he recognized even from a distance. Torres. The other was younger, a face Miller didn't know, but the badge on his shoulder was from the same department. Miller reached for his weapon but didn't raise it. He knew better. They'd come prepared. He heard Torres's voice as the boat nudged against the dock. "Tom," the captain called out, "step outside. Let's not make this worse than it already is." Miller stepped into the doorway. Torres looked older than he remembered, but his expression carried the same mix of arrogance and weariness that had defined him since their first day working together. "You shouldn't be here," Torres said. "You've crossed a line you can't walk back from." "Funny," Miller replied quietly. "You said the same thing to Harper before you buried him." The younger officer's hand went to his holster. Torres raised his own to stop him. "You think you figured it out, huh? You think you're some kind of hero cleaning up the swamp? I think you sold your soul to the same people we swore to protect this county from," Miller said. His voice didn't shake. "You sent Harper into a mission that wasn't even ours. He found out what Delta Marsh really was. And when he tried to pull out, you made sure he didn't." Torres's jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know enough," Miller said. "I know about the supply runs, the cartel payments, the fake Coast Guard contracts. I know why that sub was sealed shut." He paused, looking directly into Torres's eyes. "You didn't just want to kill him. You wanted to erase him." For a long moment, the only sound was the wind brushing through the reeds. Then Torres sighed and nodded toward the hut. "You think you're the first to come looking for truth? You don't get it, Tom. The people behind this, they don't live in our world anymore. They own it, and they don't care who gets buried under it." "Then I guess I'll dig deep enough to reach them," Miller said. He turned slightly, tapping the device clipped to his vest. "This is live. Transmission to Lucas's channel. You're on record." Torres's eyes widened. The younger officer reacted first, drawing his gun. Miller dove sideways, the first shot shattering the window behind him. He rolled behind the table, paper scattering into the air like startled birds. The second shot hit a metal pipe, sparking. Miller fired back once, hitting the wall beside the door, forcing them both to duck. The sound of gunfire echoed across the swamp, swallowed almost instantly by the fog. Miller crawled toward the far corner, his knee brushing against a generator wire. He followed it with his eyes and saw a small radio set up on a crate. His recording had gone through. Even if they killed him, the data was already leaving the swamp. Another shot cracked through the boards. The younger officer stormed in, weapon raised. Miller fired first this time, hitting the man squarely in the shoulder. He fell back with a cry, crashing into a barrel. Torres shouted his name, then turned his fury back toward Miller. "You're finished," he roared. "Yeah," Miller said, panting. "But not the way you think." Torres charged in, firing twice. One bullet grazed Miller's arm, the second struck the floorboards inches away. They collided in the middle of the room, the gun falling between them. Years of rage and regret exploded in Miller's fists. He hit Torres again and again until the older man slumped against the wall. The fight drained out of both of them. Miller stood over him, chest heaving. "You could have stopped this," he said. "All you had to do was tell the truth." Torres looked up, blood on his lip, and managed a bitter smile. "The truth doesn't save anyone. It just sinks like everything else out here." His eyes rolled back, and he went still. Miller staggered back, breathing hard. The swamp was silent again, but he knew it was only for now. He grabbed the radio transmitter and pressed the send button. "This is former Sergeant Tom Miller," he said, his voice trembling but clear. "Evidence regarding Operation Delta Marsh and the murder of Officer Daniel Harper has been transmitted to all federal channels. The involved officers are—" He hesitated, looking at Torres's body. "Neutralized." He dropped the device and stepped outside. The fog was thinning, sunlight breaking through in shards of gold. The younger officer was still alive, leaning against the dock, clutching his shoulder. "You don't understand," the man said weakly. "They'll come for you." Miller looked down at him, his expression unreadable. "Let them." Then he turned and walked toward his boat. By the time he reached the main channel, helicopters were already appearing in the distance. The news had spread faster than he expected. Maybe Lucas had pushed the data out. Maybe the feds had intercepted it. But either way, the swamp was no longer silent. Sirens wailed somewhere far behind him. The Everglades, for once, sounded awake. Later that evening, after hours of questioning and chaos, Miller found himself standing outside the courthouse in Miami. The setting sun turned the city into a mosaic of glass and fire. Reporters shouted questions. Flashbulbs went off, but their voices felt far away. The headlines were already writing themselves. Corruption scandal in Monroe County, secret drug route exposed, Delta Marsh revealed. Inside the sealed evidence room lay the dog tag he had kept with him throughout the ordeal. He asked for a moment alone with it before it was catalogued. The officer on duty nodded. Miller picked up the tag and turned it over in his palm, tracing the engraved letters. Harper, Daniel L. For the first time, the weight of it didn't crush him. It steadied him. When he walked out of the courthouse, Lucas was waiting by the steps. "They're calling you a hero," he said with a tired smile. Miller shook his head. "Heroes don't end up with this kind of mess on their hands." Lucas looked at him for a moment. "Harper would have said you did what he couldn't." That night, Miller drove back to the Everglades alone. The world beyond the swamp had turned noisy again, but out there, nothing had changed. The frogs still sang. The air still hung heavy with life and decay. He parked by the same dock where it had all begun. The water rippled gently under the fading light. He stood there for a long time, the dog tag in his hand. Then, with a quiet breath, he threw it into the water. It sank without a sound, leaving only widening circles on the surface. The swamp accepted it, just as it had accepted everything else. The dead, the secrets, the sins. Miller watched the ripples fade and realized that for the first time in years, the silence didn't scare him. It was clean, almost kind. The Everglades had taken enough from him, but it had also given something back, a truth that could finally rest. As he turned to leave, a heron lifted off from the reeds, its wings catching the dying light. The air smelled of rain, but the sky was clear. Behind him, the swamp shimmered, still and endless. Somewhere beneath that surface, Harper's memory drifted among the ghosts of everything they had both lost. Tom Miller stepped onto his boat, started the engine, and guided it slowly through the channels toward the horizon. The water parted smoothly before him, closing again in his wake. For the first time in years, he didn't look back. The last raid was over. The swamp had given him the truth and taken the rest. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe for more. Watch the next video right here, and don't forget to share this one with someone who'd love it too.